Okay, I guess everybody's in. Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
There's a few more to be let in, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
One more. So today I'm the guest. It feels strange and nice.
And I've been put in a position of responsibility.
Without whiskey.
Without whiskey. Great. So shall we begin or do we wait a bit more? Is everyone here? Well,
Yeah, I mean, we can let them in as they come along. So,
okay. Right, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Indelible Festival of Literature event. We'll be listening to, and I suppose working with in some part, our distinguished guests, Wyeth and Roula-Maria Dib. The title of today's event is Depth Poetry and Alchemical Poetics. And I'm just going to read a quick kind of a blurb about the nature of the event, and then I'll see how it's going to go, and then we'll get cracking. So, what is depth poetry? How can the concepts discussed by Carl Jung and demonstrated by his own writing become techniques for composing poetry? So, our poets this evening, Wyeth and Roula-Maria Dib, will highlight this intertwining of psychology and literature and read extracts from their poetry collections, followed by piecemeal, each reader, a workshop. And they will share some of the writing styles they have developed, which are all inspired by Jung's analytical psychology. From metaphor to myth, alchemy to active imagination, we're going to see poems, I presume, coming to life from the depths. Right, so as you all know, we have two brilliant speakers this evening, and I think the way it's going to go, guys, is we'll start with Adam. Once I've introduced him, he's going to give us a talk about myth and Irish myth and Irish poetry and depth psychology. Then he's going to do a reading, followed by a practical workshop towards the end of his half of the event. Then Roula's going to do a similar breakdown, I believe. Is that correct, Roula? Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And at the end, we'll have about 15, 20 minutes for, a communal Q&A at the end of both speakers' kind of parts of the event. So without further ado, let me please introduce Wyeth, who is an award-winning and critically acclaimed poet, playwright, and essayist, with 5 books published with Salmon Poetry. In 2019, he received the Kavanagh Fellowship Award. Adam is the author of Silent Music, highly commended for the Forward Poetry Prize, and The Art of Dying, an Irish Times Book of the Year. In 2013, Salmon published his essays, The Hidden World of Poetry, Unraveling Celtic Mythology and Contemporary Irish Poetry. This book is used as a teaching tool, and there it is, around the world, and has been officially added to 2 DePaul University classes in Chicago, books for Celtic mythology and books for contemporary Celtic literature. Wyeth's plays have been performed across Ireland and also in New York and Berlin. His play, This Is What Happened, great title, by the way, Adam. It is a really good title. I love that. Was published by Salmon in 2019. His 5th collection, About Blank, is a large 4-part poetical sequence which blurs genre, moving across poetry, prose, and dialogue. In 2020, Wyeth was selected for the Abbey Theatre's, Ireland's national theatre, engine room development program, where he worked on About Blank, as aforementioned, as an audio immersive piece. He received the Arts Council Ireland Literary Project Award to complete the project. About Blank premiered at Dublin Theatre Festival in 2021. He is also a recipient of the Live Music and Performance Scheme for a New Music and Text Work in collaboration with Emmy-nominated composer David Downs, performed by pianist Rolf Hind and cellist Adrian Mantu. He's an associate artist of the Civic Theatre Dublin and works on ideas and research for the RTE poetry program. He teaches online creative writing and has developed a unique and accessible series of talks and creative writing workshops called The Mythic Imagination for participants of all writing levels. So, very distinguished reader tonight. And I suppose, Adam, I'm going to leave it to you now.
Great, thanks so much, Omar. That's really lovely. It sounds really impressive when you hear all of that, doesn't it? But it's so nice to be with you all this afternoon for me in Dublin. It's 4 p.m. here, and but it's amazing to be part of this festival, which really is, I must say, it's such a great pleasure to be taking part of this with Roula, who has really put together such a beautiful, extraordinary festival. And I didn't think, I've always been quite sniffy, I think, about sort of online readings and festivals before, but this festival has completely brought me around, because sometimes in the afternoon I've been walking the Grand Canal and listening to the readings, and then, but also I think what's amazing with this festival, well, the diverse range, of course, of people from all over the world, but also the exchanges, the conversations and questions have been really beautiful and really intimate. And I think it's kind of, it shows this is what the internet is made for in many ways. So before reading from my new book about blank, I'll begin by talking a little bit about some of the topics: Irish literature, Celtic myth, modernism and depth literature, which feed into the world of About Blank. As this is also a reading and workshop, I won't have time to cover everything, but I did recently do a talk, and I know there's a few people here who are at that talk anyway, so there's no point me going over the same stuff. I did a talk on Roula's Site Creative YouTube channel called Depth Literature, Modernism and Irish Myth. So you can go to YouTube if you do want to hear that. While I've been writing about these things over the years, most specifically in this collection of close readings, essays called The Hidden World of Poetry, Unraveling Celtic Mythology and Contemporary Irish Poetry. It's with my latest book About Blank, where I really entered these mythical and psychological dimensions in my own creative way. I think of About Blank as a kind of dreamtime text. It's a 4-part poetic sequence which travels across various interiors, episodes and mythic dimensions of Dublin. I just wanted to check as well, just to remind people to put their selves on mute in case they're not. Since moving to Ireland in 2000, I've had an interest in Celtic mythology, which has developed and deepened over the years. This interest was first ignited by the late poet Desmond O'Grady, who I befriended in Kinsale in 2001. Desmond was both a Joycean and Celtic scholar, a prolific translator, and a close friend of Ezra Pound's. He's also a very colourful character. He lived in Italy for many years, and he played himself in Fellini's La Dolce Vita. And he became Ezra Pound's amanuensis later in life. And I think it's fair to say that O'Grady is the most prolific poetry translator since Ezra Pound. As well as receiving his doctorate from Harvard, Desmond taught at the American University in Alexandria for many years. Among his many books of translations are selected poems of C.P. Cavafy, The Song of Songs, 10 modern Arab poets, and Kurdish poems of love and liberty. During our friendship, I produced this CD of Desmond reading a selection of his poems called The Wandering Celt, and directed a documentary about his life in 2004, which is called A Life in the Day of Desmond O'Grady, and it premiered at Cork's International Film Festival, and it's also available to watch on YouTube if you want to watch it. In 1977, Dolman Press published O'Grady's seminal translation, The Gododin, a free verse version of the Middle Welsh heroic poem of Anima. This beautiful edition, published alongside Thomas Kinsella's translation of the Táin, appeared with ink paintings by leading Irish artist Louis Le Brocq. In his introduction of the Gododin, O'Grady makes some key points about Celtic art and how it differs from the classic. The Gododin, he writes, is not a literary construct like other European or heroic or epic poems. Rather, it resembles the circle of Stonehenge with every stanza a stone, or it resembles the contour rings of other Celtic holy places and habitations with entrances and exits from one circle to another. The Gododin is circular or spiral in that sense. The reader may pass from one stanza or chain of stanzas to another anywhere in the poem without breaking its happening or wholeness. Begin anywhere, progress anywhere, and get the whole poem. In a sense, one stanza is enough because the whole poem is embryonic in every stanza, but we must read the whole poem to realize this. As in the interweaving in early Celtic manuscripts or the early Celtic designs on stones, what happens in the corner is as important as what happens at the center of the parchment or stone. Because there is no corner or center other than the surface of the sheet or the stone itself, or as in the Gododin, the battle itself. And he continues, the Celtic is an alternative form of art to the classic. The Gododin has no beginning, middle, or end. We start it during the battle. There is no consecutive presentation of experience. A dimension is created that cheats time and renders everything immediate. About heroes, there is no hero, but rather the idea of heroism. End quote. So O'Grady brings many extraordinary insights to the fore here, surrounding not just Celtic culture, but imaginative literature. What's immediately striking is that O'Grady could be speaking about modernist literature, and indeed any play that director Peter Hall would describe as having a poetical shape, which Hall has considered all the best plays to have. The idea of having no beginning, middle, or end relates to key pieces of classical modernist works, perhaps most famously with Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, which ends on the same line it starts on, and Waiting for Godot, the play where famously, apparently, nothing happens twice. Psychologist Peter O'Connor echoes O'Grady's thoughts when he asserts in his book Beyond the Mist that Irish mythology, unlike Greek or Roman, is not linear but meandering. He also writes that Celtic myth is dominated by an archetypal feminine ambience. There is a sense of connectedness and interconnectedness with the Celtic psyche, not logos and separateness. Marie-Louise Chustet, a French linguist and literary scholar who specialized in Celtic studies, especially Irish mythology, writes that the peculiar difficulty with the mythological world of the Celts is that when seeking an approach to it, you find that you're already in it. One has to artificially contrive a beginning in what otherwise feels like a cycle of interconnected themes and characters. Irish verse is one of the most ancient in Europe. In his book, The White Goddess, Robert Graves writes that English poetic education should really begin not with Canterbury Tales, not with the Odyssey, not even with Genesis, but with the Song of Abbagh, sometimes called the Mystery. Abbagh is said to be a Milesian prince or druid who settled in Ireland hundreds of years before Christ and is from the Book of Invasions. He's thought to have lived in the 6th century BC, was Ireland's first great poet from the early Irish mythological cycle. This song poem is a shape-shifting invocation which sings Ireland into being and calms down a magical storm set up by the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, who then had control of Ireland. The Song of Abbagh is often considered as Ireland's first poem. Douglas Hyde, in his Story of Early Gaelic literature, says of these verses, these 3 short pieces of verse ascribed to Abbagh are certainly very ancient and very strange. It may very well be that they actually do present the oldest surviving lines of any vernacular tongue in Europe, except Greece. In the mystery, Abbagh is claiming to subsume all being and the creative universe within himself, just as Lord Krishna did in Bhagavad Gita. Abbagh is declaring his druidic powers over those of the Tuatha De Danann druids. At the same time, he is heralding the moment when man claims sovereignty over the earth and the moment when Irish history as such begins. It is the ritualistic creation of a new order, or as Chustet writes, the day on which the race of men triumphed over the race of gods marks the end of the mythical period when the supernatural was the undisputed master of the earth, and the beginning of the new period in which men and gods inhabit the earth together. Psychologically, we might see this as the spark of consciousness emerging, the moment when the ego begins to emerge from the undifferentiated world of the collective unconscious, and the self and others are dimly perceived as separate and connected. This process continues throughout life, with the perception of separateness continually moving between clarity and confusion as we struggle with regressive wishes to unite with the Great Mother in some replay of the uterine paradise. The arrival of the sons of Mill symbolizes the emergence of a separate identity, one which demands recognition of the source of being, if it is to be achieved at all and not simply drowned. The second landing may well symbolize a second birth, the psychological virgin birth of the individual identity. The element of water is universally regarded as a symbol of birth and renewal. Here then is the birth of the mythic imagination, or to coin a new term, depth literature. In attempting to write about my latest work about blank, I came up with depth literature. Previously, I'd been using the term mythic imagination, and then Eliot's term, mythic method, which he first used when reviewing Joyce's Ulysses. As well as referring to myth, depth literature includes psychological resonances of depth psychology, which more accurately encapsulate my method of working, particularly regarding the relationships between the conscious and the unconscious. Like depth psychology, depth literature refers to a literary approach while exploring the subtle, unconscious, and transpersonal aspects of human experience. A depth literary approach may include literary traditions of myth, metaphor, psychology that explores the unconscious and involves the study and exploration of dreams, complexes, archetypes, and individuation. Depth literature then is a creative quest for the ancient source of vision and meaning in the world, just as we see in the Song of Abaddon, Ireland's first poem. All of us at one time or another are engaged in creating personal mythologies that reflect the larger myths of the culture and our own deepest desires and aspirations. And art can bring these deeper mythic structures of experience into awareness. Through art, we can deeply experience and learn to recognize the archetypal content embedded in our dreams and daydreams, feelings, beliefs, relationships, conscious creations, and behavior. In the new film, Drive My Car, which I just saw the other day, adapted from Haruki Murakami's short story, the theatre director in the film tells the young actor to yield himself and respond to the text. Talking about Chekhov's Uncle Vanya, which they're rehearsing, he says, the text is questioning you. If you listen to it and respond, the same will happen to you. I think this beautifully encapsulates the depth literary approach, where we're not just reading a text, but the text is reading us. So About Blank begins with the narrator walking the streets of Dublin, just as I was spending my afternoons walking around my new home of Dublin after living in West Cork for 15 years. I was now exploring the Georgian and Victorian suburbs of Terenure, Rathgar, Rathmines, Harold's Cross, Portobello, Ranelagh, Ballsbridge. Walking the Grand Canal, branching off down new roads and alleyways and parks. All this started to feed into my whole creative imagination. So writing and walking started to mirror each other, creating new dimensions of psychogeography. I'd spend a couple of hours each day taking a line for a walk with no clear purpose other than to write, and then a couple of hours walking about the streets with no clear purpose other than to wander. Psychogeography, as the term suggests, is the intersection of psychology and geography. It focuses on our psychological experiences of the city and reveals or illuminates forgotten, discarded, or marginalized aspects of the urban environment. All this opened up the mythic imagination of the piece and expanded psychologically too, particularly towards archetypal psychology and Jung's principles of the shadow, the collective unconscious, and active imagination dream work. A quick digression here. I remember on the Psych-Creative talk, someone asked if there was an alternative term to active imagination, or perhaps a more better or precise term for a writer. I don't think anyone could think of one, but I was recently read that James Hillman used the term soul fiction sometimes as an alternative. Another Jungian concept which started to form spontaneously were aspects of the feminine. The deeper psychic parts of the city and self took on a natural feminine aspect in my writing, which led me to Jung's theories of anima. The anima is the archetype of the feminine in the unconscious of man. So following my nose through the writing led me deeper down these archetypal paths. So we'll be using some of these ideas of psychogeography and dinshanachus, which is an old Irish term meaning the power or law of place, in the creative writing exercise, which I'll set after my reading. So I'm now going to read an extract from About Blank. And this is from the first section called Summer's Death, Seedful. And it's written in a mixture of poetry and prose. And I'm not going to jump around the book, but I'm just going to read this one extract, which is about half of part one. And I timed it earlier. I think it comes in around 20 minutes. Each life hides another life inside. Another voice, never heard out loud, speaks in its own way. a silent film unfolding an unbroken story of loss. This voice ripples in each of us. Call it the internal feminine. She lies curled like a question mark in bed, or dare I say, snake. A woman in fetal position, coiled like a brand new fern about to open. She is bereft, smelling the shirts of someone who left. Is it her father, her brother, her lover? Let's call it the forsaken masculine, the disappearance of one whose voice is heard in a dog's bark, or at least felt in the harsh October bite, the dank nights that grow longer each passing year. He walks with a secret voice in his back pocket. It moves through him. He locks the car door and gets closer with every step. And every moment is a step inside him that makes it move further away. He keeps walking until one day he falls into his own shadow, and no one can see it, and no one can hear it, and no one can touch it, and no one can smell it, and no one can taste it. The secret walks on, never giving itself away. Where did it go? Split asunder by the shadow that grows like a gulf, an oil spill mushrooming, seeping into everything. Let's not make light of what can't be seen precisely. Let's not lose pursuit of specifics on the grounds of reality. Destroyed after last year's storm, they are waiting to be born. New ferns unfurl, fanning the earth. This is the way always. I'm on a beach near Irish Town. There are people swimming all around. She has just gone to the cafe to get drinks. I'm lying on my back being lulled by the sound of waves and children playing. The sun is beating down. I feel I haven't had a life yet, that I've just been dropped from space into this place. Everything begins now. I look at the sky and realize I can't move. I am paralyzed by this thought. The wind blows grains of sand on my face. Everything I've known before is washed away. I realize everything that I thought I was is just the surface, and that what is true is blank. I am not who I am. Voices at the back of a room, everyone speaking over one another. I can't make out who is saying what. For a moment, I have a picture of myself in another skin. A figure bends down and hands me a cold drink. I lift my arm towards it. Adam, reaching for God in the Sistine Chapel, as if all life depended on this fizz. The sounds of children and waves return, shifting towards me from another world, and she talks about the price of drinks. I nod and listen and think. I cannot see the sand that lies beneath. At the same time, I'm half listening to strangers. Sometimes I wonder if all communication is in fantasy. Each word creates another universe out of the one before, which in turn creates other words that are not words, and they occur, as it were, in their own worlds, independent of thought, insouciant to the backroom chatter where insolvent smiles while away the small hours. Words must be some kind of cybernetic hoax to try and coax a confession out of, dipping in and out of the mind, a black box switch in which we are duped by their respected sounding, a circular relationship that engenders change in the environment, and that alteration is reflected in the system in some manner, triggering a structural transformation. Landing upon a word is a love transferred. Alighting from a word sparks pairs of opposites. Think of two people talking politics, poles apart in their views. Take that word, pole. They are both either end of this pole. They are both grasping at the same pole. In the end, there's no difference because they're talking about the same pole in different ways, but neither one of them can hear the other because the pole is so long you have to shout to be heard. And when you have to shout to be heard, you can only hear your own voice. What you have are two transmitters and no receiver. To receive, you have to empty yourself, but you can't be empty if you're full of static fury. What I'm getting at, or attempting to suggest, is that I'm aware as I propose this particular episode of this particular life on this particular day, there is no way you're going to grasp what I first imagined and second set out to express. Yet, in this flight of fancy, what you suppose will be what happens. And as I give voice to this particular life, another life grows inside. Not that anything is supposed to happen, not that anything can happen. What is forming has already been formed. What is happening is as stillborn and as stock still as the gaps between these words. A white field of blank. There is nothing more to see and nothing more to say. Nothing more say than seeing a woman through a window on the bus. You attach to that glimpse whatever it is you are open to now. Most people don't see this particular person on this particular bus, but this one person does. And that is what this story, if I can call it a story, which I won't, is about. What does this glimpse tell us about ourselves? It tells us what we want to hear. It tells us we are on the bus, having been glimpsed by someone on the street. There may be a faint picture within you now, and yet I have not mentioned any distinctive details. They don't even exist, which is a crazy proposition because we know very well, or did, that two strangers, a passerby and a passenger, are always with us. The glimpse passes in a second, but the thought attached to that glimpse lingers and leads to something else, something hidden that must come out, an essence. This is what the momentary chimera is about. It is for you to seek out the truth of the passerby and the passenger and to decide whether any part of them is worth detaining. If we call the passenger Claire, the passerby Stephen, we add fuel to the fire of hallucination. These schoolbook names that stretch throughout the English-speaking world and beyond resonate with certain reflexes. We know damn well what is happening here. Well, we have no idea actually, but it's all about that slippery pole again. Everything before and after sex is exactly what it suggests. Everything between is where and what literature takes off. I do hope you don't think I'm fiddling you. What I have to say is wholly serious. In the words of a great sage, you have to split the stick to find the light. By communicating with the dream, we are able to glean its meaning. This is everything that forgets. Stephen sees her face again through the glass. He recalls each feature rippling under the reflected shades of the shops and houses, the snailing traffic fracturing her mouth and jawline into broken shards, a stained glass puzzle. He buys a pen and pad in Spa and sits by the Grand Canal. The words are tentative at first, the descriptions vague and disjointed. He's following the darts of thinking, and the words are helping him to ground his thoughts into what feels to him, at least, like a fully fixed certainty. A gabbling gang of students released from the Atlas Language School behind him, a steady succession of vernaculars making love individually, wrangling, mangling, disentangling tongues, jostling for elbow room, leaning towers of Babel by the water's edge. Stephen's best image is Claire's face reflected in a glass. The exact words escape him. They escape me. She escapes us all. But a latent power remains beneath this sideways rush, an impression of condensation on glass. Her face, a new penny in a fountain, looking out from the dark. A penny, if any, for where do we go? Do they go? Our thoughts, like old water, continue to stir. Penny is the wrong currency. Obviously, Stephen's holding out for silver, but he may just get away with its shadowy glimmer. The idea of coins and lady luck is enough to go on. Indistinct instincts. There is no going back from here. He types it up at home and discovers the suddenness of a clear-cut verb, the satisfaction of an adjective swerve. He finds a melodic coherence, a precision and elegance he has never known previously. Out of the love never encountered, an invisible stranger. Where is Claire now? Is she at any level aware her image has been played over and again in Stephen's head? She might sense something. She is known to daydream, especially on the ride home under the plane trees that flank the South Circular. For all we know, Claire caught sight of Stephen, her eyes meeting his behind the glassy sheen for a second, between wondering what to have for tea and who was around for the weekend. Perhaps the glimpse was just enough for her to think about a boy she knew from home. Whatever happened to him, she wonders, as she passes Dolphin's Barn and moves on to Rialto. An older voice behind her says, "They are taking over." Claire's aware that naming is caging. Something seen is something taken. The living sacrificed in dead words, trapping a cosmos into an hourglass. The more that we write, the more we forget. What remains of the living breathes in the dead. Would the English, for example, have taken any other native tree as a national symbol if its name were not linked to Druid? What are feelings then before their sounding? And what are feelings when they are unspoken? Has language altered our reality so much that we move in a hall of mirrors, projecting skewed images onto the world and only seeing what is thrown back at us? Claire's wary when it comes to the hallucination of conversation. She has a good inner ear for what's really being said behind the thread of words. While we have uncovered the slippery nature of language, that words don't always mean what they say, or put another way, the speaker invariably remains in the shadows of what they're saying, and it's more about the current and humming between. Claire's aware of the generative properties words embody, the esoteric incantations locked in a series of letters, which in the right order can transform reality, unearthing a language within a language, a molecular pattern of circular causal wires springing from a level below meaning carried by the land. Some people have an innate ability to separate the dross from people's sounds. Others can't tell the mole from the mound. Claire discerns another language, a language of the earth. As she alighted the bus, Claire walked home with a prickling feeling that the state of the world didn't just apply to the woman on the bus, but that it applied to her, and not just to her, but to us. The slippery pole again. Although Claire could guess what the woman meant by "they are taking over," the words took her somewhere else, deeper, darker, coiling inside her, a slithery, inky blank. Claire knew then her life was not her own. She was in someone else's hands, being shaped in ways she could not control. An image erased, yet somehow known. This is the way of no return. The thought passed in a minute, but it was enough for Claire to feel a rush of sickness as she blinked and came back to her life in Rialto. Earlier in the day, Claire had been to Dublin Zoo. She liked to go in early spring, crocus time, trees in bloom. She saw herself in all the animals, believed each animal was a totem, a talisman. This, it should be said, was more an instinctive sensation than anything pushing its way into words. But Claire, being Claire, couldn't help but wonder about her own limits. She enjoyed the lions, the meerkats, the pandas, but most of all, Claire loved watching the black panther. The cage looked empty, but then 2 amber eyes loomed out, followed by blue-black fur. A full muscular profile materialized, pure cat, for once an irrefutable fact. It sloped towards Claire, sniffing the air around her, sidling from left to right, holding her eyes. She tried to imagine what it might be thinking. Nothing human. How could it? Every inch of it exhibited burning instinct. Thick, panting blankness bore into her. Those were her thoughts while she watched the panther's blue-black paws pad back into the shadows. Then the cat roared and her reverie was ended. That was that. Going, she caught his sweet honeysuckle scent. Within the love that never meets, the animal is released. I don't think a cage is necessarily a bad place. We can spend our whole life cocooned in one enclosure, all those coats in the closet. My fear is that I'll only be going from one womb to another. This is the way through. Stephen was Googling where to publish when he came across a free workshop taking place in Rathmines. He sped down Leinster Road with the Clare poem in his pocket. He wondered if this was the beginning of something, Stephen the poet. A gust of wind swirled up some littering leaves, and Stephen reeled off his lines through their circular dance. He loved the way certain ones rubbed up against one another, sliding off at the tongue. The poetry workshop took place in a private room in the old library. Stephen's poem, like everyone's, was read in silence. He noticed the others jotting marks on their copies, circling certain words, scratching out others, writing comments in the margins. As Stephen read aloud, he wondered which of the words the group would pick out. His voice grew smaller and smaller, disappearing inside that inside tunnel. One by one, each person offered their penny's worth. Stephen sank deeper into his chair as he saw Claire's image defiled in front of him. Not a single line remained intact. The sheets were collected and delivered back, a stillbirth swaddled in white cloth. Claire, or at least Claire's face in the pain, had vanished. Stephen walked to Portobello Bridge and dropped the tatters of his battered poem in the canal. All his watery letters bled into one vanishing word, a blinding blank. Of course, Claire wasn't dead because Claire doesn't exist, but Claire, of course, does very much exist. There are Claires present everywhere. Each one brings their own unique Claireness to this particular individual. There is nothing Claire does not contain. Since her defacement on the page, Claire's image has almost completely disappeared from Stephen, who himself is now so far removed that he's as pointless as a paper bag blowing down Rathmines Road. Claire was on her way back from the corner shop. She had bought a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. As she walked, she could feel a slight shadow trailing her. She shrugged off this vague sensation, but the shadow continued to grow around her. Each lane articulates another voice. Each voice gets tangled down another back alley, which leads to a derelict building. A boarded up door standing dumb without question. The smashed eyes of a seer peering through. A stone slab sleeps in the navel of the basement, waiting to be opened. Claire herself might as well be blind as she senses this place assumingly. No such thing as the truest sense. One man in the window is cut in two. What are you to do with this sum? Is the man reduced to 50% because of his position according to you, or is he actually cut up, a split stick? Who is the one beyond the city, beyond the man and the woman divided by the city? The myth before the myth. This is the way back to the one with both hands on the wheel, driving through the night, slipping like silk between streetlights, hands firm at 9 and 3, slinking down avenues, creamily in a dream, purring smooth as a black cat lapping up the night. He's got the whole world in his hands. The steering wheel stands for the heavens, the wheel of control, the wheel of fortune, the star wheel, the zodiac, the pre-Christian sun wheel, the round table, the mandala. The star of the show holds the universal in their hands. She's got you and me, brother, in her hands. Before the cross was a cross, it was a disc. We took the great wheel out of the sky, the feminine circle made invisible, sacrificed on the cross. He takes the wheel of her life into his own hands. The invisible heavens wheel above as they steer a steady course beyond that bounding rim of the wheel of becoming. The power of the engine, 1,000 horses, a ravenous beast roaring from the east eats up the miles, unraveling the white ribbon road, headlights, ghost trails, chasing the dark night of the soul. The only thing between is the scenery made abstract by sat-nav. Everything they need to see within is neon lit in the leather interior. He who pierces through the valley, now just a lang of digital signs. He who once worshipped the wheel, now holds it daily, rootless, ahistorical. This is life, this capsule, this cocoon, until it splits open its husk. A car is not a car. It is a symbol for the transmigration of souls entering the celestial city through a cat's eye. A car is a woman stopped on the road that a man has just stepped out of, who is a cat waiting to jump, who is a beggar asking for change from a child who is a bird falling. Our concern is with the woman walking through Rialto, who is already falling. It is the Claire within the Claire prompting the whole debacle. Here we fall back into the historical ego of tribes, our fathers and mothers. Can they be left at the door like a pair of outworn shoes after we've tripped down the sweet-smelling avenue? Can you close the door on the person who brought you to the threshold in the first place? The movement from one side of the mind to the other, from the bottom of the body to the top, from the quotidian purchase of milk and bread at the corner shop to a supra-consciousness. Paper bags, poetry. She's in love with a poet who doesn't have a face. They move along the path and a shaft of light cuts between branches. She's in love with a poet who doesn't have a voice. The thrust of their words moves beneath their feet, kicked up leaves, a quiver of light just out of sight, a cloud on the horizon, a ribbon of wind begins to hint at what cannot be known. She's in love with a poet she'll never hold. Lost looks take place in another room that cannot be entered. The suggestion of certain features represent the whole, something to do with synecdoche, a locked door without a key, a mouth without a tongue, doors that will never open on their own, water in a lock. She's in love with a poet of remembrance, a certain embrace, the way legs twist under chairs and hands slip beneath, brushing knees. She's in love with a poet who's a long time dead. A hole in the head opens, lines uncoil as the morning light creeps along the page. The dead poet's words blossom in her mouth. She's in love with an unheard song. When poetry is poetry, nothing is said. It's nature itself keeping watch. The eye of the storm listens in on a language unfound, severed tongues buried in pockets of humus. The looks are feminine, the sounds masculine. The coming together of two primal forces breaks the binary into multiple voices. Behind the blind, the fly sizzles in its own demise, becoming an extinguished wish. Blackbirds flit from tree to tree. She's in love with the first idea, last seen in the animal's eye. So I'll leave it there. Oh, good, you're still there. Thank you. So About Blank started its life on a Word document called Write Rubbish Speed Writing, where I allow my unconscious to wander wherever and however it wants to go. And it started off as a space to limber up before the proper writing, but I find nearly all my work comes out of this document now. So I just want to begin with this exercise just quickly. This is one I always start with whenever I do a creative writing workshop. Irish language poet Nuala Nagonal says poetry springs from a level below meaning. It is a molecular thing, a pattern of sound and image. So let's try this speed or automatic writing exercise, but with this caveat, where at the beginning of each sentence, you begin with a line, I remember. So this exercise comes from American authors Joe Brainard's memoir, I Remember. And I remember is a list of the author's memories, each one beginning with the phrase, I remember. Memories from childhood and adulthood stand side by side, and important memories share the page with seemingly inconsequential memories. And the book is a testament to the potential power of juxtaposition and the uncensored mind. So you'll just need a blank piece of paper if you've got one, and pen, or you can do it straight onto your desktop, whatever you prefer. Sometimes when speed writing, a good way of loosening up and not feeling self-conscious is to imagine that you're slightly unhinged, perhaps stoned or drunk. So just kind of letting a flow, find a kind of flow if you can. Or you might be stoned or drunk already, which is great. Try to avoid any preconceived notions of where your memory will take you. So just start writing down your own memories, beginning each sentence with I remember, and allow your mind to explore all of the years of your life in no particular order. So it doesn't matter if it's made up or nonsense. The only rule is to keep writing, keep moving forward with it, and don't look back. A useful trick if you get stuck is think of your senses. So follow your nose, eyes, ears, tongue, or fingers into those memories. And if you start to get stuck, just follow the phrase I remember, and then add a random word, a concrete noun, and just keep writing from there. So go ahead and do that quickly. I'm just looking at time, and I don't want to go over into Roula's time, so I'm just gonna, you can continue that afterwards, that exercise, and just, you know, kind of keep it going. It could be a good morning one to do. Imagine doing it for a week, even just at like half a page or a page. Often with the speed writing exercise, I just say that, fill the page, and it is literally, for once, it's quantity and not quality, which is really important, I think, when starting to write, just getting into a flow of rhythm and filling the page with words. So one final aspect I'd like to finish on, which led me to, which will lead to this creative writing exercise, which I'll finish on, is the sense of place in About Blank, and how place, in this case Dublin, becomes part of the mythic world, psychogeography, and forms much of the architecture in the work. Sharing some similarities to psychogeography from early Irish literature contains a large corpus of material called Dinshanachus, meaning power of place or law of place. So Dinshanachus consists of poems and tales relating to place names and their meanings. Many of the place names encountered in these early writings are heavily laminated with legend, which often imbues them with an allure that heightens their significance. This coating of toponomic lore and legend can stimulate the imagination to responses beyond the merely visual, so that ordinary places are transformed into evocative imagined landscapes that are often at odds with the geographical realities. In her introduction to About Blank, the poet Jessica Traynor describes Dublin as a major character in the work, which I really like. And these ideas of psyche and city intermingle throughout the work. And by getting under the skin of the words, we can also gain deeper significance and meaning in our work. So for example, the name Dublin means black or dark pool, referring to the River Poddle, which was the main source of drinking water for the city for more than 500 years. And this dark pool running underneath also runs beneath About Blank. Far from being an accurate mapping of Dublin, as Joyce boasted with Ulysses, Dublin in About Blank is more about this dark pool underworld, symbolizing the shadowy sense of otherness, which deepens towards principles of the feminine and anima. So memory, place, and etymology are powerful forces and meeting points in the depth literary approach. And I just want to read quickly this poem. It's a new poem I just discovered, by a new collection that's just come out, a debut by Audrey Malloy. I'll try and stick it on the chat, and then you can read it as well. Yeah, I don't think, no. Did that work? I don't think I copied, did it? No. Give it one more shot. Won't let me paste it. Anyway, I'll just read the poem out. It's not too long. It's called The Important Things, by Audrey Malloy. There's a word in Scots Gaelic, scríob, which refers to the tingle on the upper lip just before you take a sip of whiskey. We are talking after the burial. Now they've allowed funerals again, across a table no bigger than a dinner plate, about those we've lost to the virus. And whiskey or whiskey, the important things, when Roy Buchanan comes on the jukebox, and I can almost taste the light film of sweat on your skin. I should have known it right then. An inventor will always be curious, and that here in this bar, months from now, you will sit in false darkness with another muse, while on our whiteboard veranda, its double swing written by Harper Lee, I'll dip my best bristle brush in tin after tin of green, viridian, sap, olive, emerald, and slap paint mixed with salt onto timber shades, until every trace of off-white is erased. I'll forgive you in time, everything but the way you changed my name in the song that made you famous, trimming a syllable to rhyme with began. The irony of that, since it was the end and not even our story, though all unhappy stories resemble each other. But let's not catastrophize. We haven't yet begun. And right here, right now, in the fiddler's arms, there's a feeling coming over me, a surface tension close to my upper lip that no English word can describe. So the the idea in this is, well, normally I should say I do an exercise from the hidden world of poetry. I often choose a poem by Paul Durkin called The Male Accent, or Elaine Nicolanon's The Border. But even though this is a less obvious sort of power of place poem, I think it does have these elements of the psychogeography going on within it, and the personal cultural elements, and even getting under the skin of the words, as she does at the start. So we get this cocktail of the personal and cultural, and we have the mention of the virus, which we can all relate to. There's a mention of Leonard Cohen's classic song, So Long Marianne, alongside the less known mispronunciation. Her name was actually Mariana. And so the whole poem hinges on this small detail that he changed her name, which apparently she was very hurt about. And notice how places like the Fiddler's Arms give a strong sense of place, as well as having a clever double meaning. So the important things here are all those seemingly inconsequential ones. So our memories are an infinite resource, but we're not just made up of personal moments and individual detail. We all exist within particular cultures, and there are historical episodes that run parallel to our own lives. Personal memories can often be associated with cultural memories, and this shared knowledge can inform our writing. We can all remember where we were during certain cultural events, such as when the Twin Towers were destroyed, or perhaps when a huge public figure suddenly dies, such as Princess Diana. As well as historical events and characters, you can also use songs and films and even TV programs. So I don't think there's time to actually do this exercise now, but what I'll do is I'll just give you the instructions and you write them down. And then after this event, you can go ahead and do the exercise if you like. So it's in 4 parts. So part 1 is choose a place from your childhood and make a list of names, towns, parishes, villages, streets, roads, lanes, hills, woods, parks, cemeteries, etc. So choose a place from your childhood and make a list of names associated with that place. Part 2 is write down in your notebook some cultural details from the period of your own past. So think of songs, singers, with the poem we just saw, we had Leonard Cohen, films, historical events, fashion, hairstyles, types of names, all those things. So write down some cultural details from that period of your past. Part 3 is to recall a special event from times of year that happened there. So there could be summer fetes, it could be Halloween, Christmas, harvest festivals. So just pick a specific year and an event. It could also be like a concert, could be a sporting event, a TV program, and it could even be something more personal like a school play, a homecoming, a wedding, a party or a wake. So a special event that happened from your childhood. And then finally, part 4 is to revisit this place in your mind and write a poem or prose piece which uses some of the cultural and personal details you've gathered and which focuses on the event you've chosen. So it can be fiction, it can be autobiography, or a mixture of both. The event could be a success or a failure. And don't forget to use any pertinent sensory perception from the period, so fashion, haircuts, as well as the cultural associations. And when you use your own cultural memories in your writing, it's important not to use them for purely nostalgia or conservative reasons. It's important to retain focus and have a purpose when you use your past. So beware of indulging in your own nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. Okay, so that's the exercise, and over to you, Roula. Thanks very much for listening. And I think we'll be talking questions and whatnot later, I think.
Thank you, Adam. That was a really, really powerful talk and a wonderful reading. Fascinating stuff. I mean, I thought it was a kind of wisdom literature in a way, and the text performs itself. It's not wisdom about things, it's through itself. I felt that in the images, they have that sense of encompassing the whole of what you read. It was lovely, and I'm gonna be buying the book very soon. So thanks for that.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Our second speaker is the founder of Indelible, and indeed the mind and graft behind this festival, Many of you, in fact, probably all of you know her, Roula-Maria Dib, Dr. Roula-Maria Dib. She's an award-winning literary scholar, poet, and editor whose research interests include literature, creative writing, and Jungian psychology. She's the winner of the British Council's Alumni Awards for 2021 to 2022 for the Culture and Creativity category in the UAE and a recipient of the AUD Provost Award for Outstanding Literary Achievement 2020. Her book, Jungian Metaphor in Modernist Literature, published by Routledge in 2020, was shortlisted as a finalist for the International Association for Jungian Studies Book Awards, and some poems from her collection, Simply Being, published by Cairo Press in 2021, have been nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Roula-Maria is also the founding editor, as we know, of literary and arts journal Indelible, and creative producer of literary event series such as the one we're at this evening, Indelible Evenings, which is not we're at the festival, but it's part of Indelible, backed by Indelible, sorry, as well as Site Creative, a virtual salon for researchers, artists, and writers with a background in Jungian psychology. Her MOOC, Why Online Creative Communities Matter, is featured on academia.edu. She's currently a professor of English at the American University in Dubai and a member of the Poetry Society, the Royal Society of Literature, the British Association for Modernist Studies, the International Association for Jungian Studies, and the Jungian Society for Scholarly Studies. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Roula-Maria. And I think, Roula, you're going to be doing a similar tripartite format.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Omar, for the introduction, and apologies for my extra wordy bio. So I need to keep reminding myself to cut it down short. Before I start, I want to thank Adam for this gorgeous reading. And I don't know, I mean, it's going to be very difficult for me to read right after you, Adam. And I would say one thing, you would make Jung proud. I love the way you demonstrate his ideas. You don't talk about them in the poems, but you actually, you put them to life. And yes, I highly recommend Adam's book, The Hidden World of Poetry, and also, of course, about blank. So there are actually many techniques of poetry that Jung spoke about without calling them poetic techniques. I also found Jung to demonstrate his own theories, although he never really spoke about them. He never spoke about poetry as much. It did happen every now and then, but he wasn't the type that that focused on poetry or on poetic techniques the way that we do now. This is my book, Jungian Metaphor in Modernist Literature, and it looks at many of Jung's theories, and especially in context of the modernist writers, specifically James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, and also H.D. So Jung talks about the symbol. He talks about metaphors. He talks about, well, he doesn't really talk about it, but I talk about it in this book, in the Yeats chapter, but it's the focus on meditations on an image. I'm also going to speak about dream writing and myth making, and of course, one of Jung's favorite subjects, alchemy, and how we can bring that into our poems. First of all, I know that most of you know what archetypes are, but I would like to introduce it briefly to those who may be new to the concept of the collective unconscious and Jung in general. So the core of Jungian theory is the notion of the collective unconscious and the archetypes, as we all know. The collective unconscious is not like the personal unconscious. It's not that repertoire of hidden fears and desires. It is actually an impersonal unconscious. The collective unconscious is impersonal. It is common among people from across different cultures and historical epochs. Its main constituents are the archetypes, which are psychic energies, psychic as in mental energies. These energies are invisible until they are projected as symbols of representation. So archetypes are not images per se, as they are phylogenetically inherited, a priori possibilities existing to apperceive a universal, emotional, core human experience, myth, or thought image fantasy, to quote Jung. An archetype, again, in Jung's words, can never be exactly pinpointed or apprehended because it exists in such a primitive formal state. So they're always in the before state. They only become visible to us when they become archetypal images. So they become visible once they manifest themselves as images. And this is why Jung differentiates between the archetype as such, which is the psychic energy or the possibility, and the archetypal image, which is the archetype's projection through an image or symbol, such as images in art and symbols in poetry. The use of archetypes in poetry helps in identifying the connections that give the works their shape and structure. And so the detection of governing archetypes, according to Jung, it serves principally to show hidden connections that universalize what might seem highly idiosyncratic. What differentiates symbols from the archetypes as such, which are the energies, is that the former, the symbols, are not inherited. So we must note that one archetype can manifest itself in endless symbols. The archetype as such, or the archetype in itself, is the inherited energy. However, the symbols, I mean, we can all create different symbols for the same archetypal pattern or the same archetypal energy. So Jung did many great things for Western culture, and we can say now for global culture in general, now that Jung has become more well-known around the world. Some of the things that he did for us as favors is, first of all, he kind of returned the bridge between arts and sciences, or he at least attempted to do that. And not until very recently are we seeing that, there is a connection between art and science. Indelible has actually hosted a few sessions that speak about the interdisciplinarity of poetry. So we did lots of things about poetry and medicine, poetry and psychology, poetry and architecture, poetry and art, and so on and so forth. So the interdisciplinarity of his approach was quite new, especially in the field of psychology, which was also quite new when he was around. Jung's psychology is a psychology of connection rather than a psychology of separation. And this is why we find it helpful to implement some of his techniques in poetry, because poetry is also a psychology of connection. This is what metaphors are for. This is what creativity is for in general. So you bring two apparently distinct things and you put them together, you find a connection, and you have art. Jung, of course, many of you know, he came up with the concepts and coined the terms introversion, extroversion. Jung had a huge influence on film and novel writing, especially with characterization and character design. Jung's theories also could be seen, as we said a bit earlier, when looking at the importance of metaphor, which we will speak about also in a bit. The symbol, we said that the symbol for Jung was very important. And it's not just that it is a manifestation of an energy, of a psychic energy, but because of that, a symbol is actually a language. Every single symbol is a language or a portal that is open to hosting the unconscious. So this is our door to the unconscious through symbols. Jung was interested in alchemy, of course, because it was full of symbols. So alchemical writing it was very enigmatic, and he was interested in the enigmas and in the mysteries behind the symbols in this form of writing. He saw strange things, strange writings about strange concepts and strange notions that seemed to be a little wacko, but in a good way. He sensed that they could help us. And in it, he found a metaphor for transformation, for personal transformation, or the term that he later on coined to be individuation. So many modern Jungian theorists are beginning to look at quantum physics and psychology. Many neuroscientists also know this connection. And this was something that, well, we don't know who started it exactly, but we do know of a few names, and Jung is one of them, although he did not mention it as quantum physics. But we saw his psychology of possibilities to highly resemble many of the theories in quantum physics as well, especially with symbols, because symbols always point toward a possible meaning. So poetry, with this interdisciplinary approach, could also be seen as a form of pinning possibilities or posting possibilities and putting them together in a quantum physics-like manner. Okay, so I'm going to start reading a few poems. I'll start with two. The first one is called Archetypes. Let me just pull it out. It's a very, very short poem about this notion of possibilities. The poem was initially called Possibilities. When was the last time you puffed a dandelion's gentle mane, scattering like tessera, the way the many shapes of you light speed through possibilities, morphings of an ever-present? The next poem is called Papyrus Plains. Sorry, bear with me, okay. I pray to the spilled dust in those ancient libraries where I blinked and squinted as I shed wishes from rows lining my eyelids. I heard litanies and lashes, and in every self in that hall of mirrors, invoking spirits between the pages. I fold the papyrus into planes and shoot arrows without the bows. So these are two poems with archetype themes. Myth. We know that myth, as Adam also spoke earlier, they are a big thing for Jung. Jung found them a good way to get in touch with the collective unconscious. Myths actually help us to discover via their path the link between the ancient past and the modern present. Here, the Jungian view resonates well with those of you who are familiar with T.S. Eliot's mythic method, which juxtaposes and parallelizes the ancient with the modern, highlighting similarities in two different eras, which transcends the narrative. So, in other words, the mythic method is a revelatory collage combining fragments of both the past and the present in literature. So this is to quote T.S. Eliot. I've always found myths to be very inspirational in writing poetry, and actually in writing anything. But what's very interesting, if we want to take this notion of writing your myth up a notch and make it rewriting a myth, we do not lose those archetypal pattern. We do not lose the archetypal energy. As a matter of fact, you play around with the myth in your writings, and the energy, the archetypal energy is still there. However, you create something new from it. I'm going to read another small poem called Coating Fog, which was inspired by the story of Aphrodite shedding roses from her eyes. However, she does not shed roses from her eyes here. It's different. Wait and see. A ruby chalice smelling of rosariums. Stories tell us again how you were shed from Aphrodite's rib. Remind us why we, like Mark Antony, fell in love, slipping into a fragrance. Translucent cups frozen into lines on the coating fog. Through smiles sketched. The sanguine-colored drink, now transparent. Light reveals the core of the wound, a place where motion spoons through the ice-bound layer, cracking into all we drink. Now, the wound and the light, this, of course, is after Rumi. The next poem is called Coquelicot, which is the French word for the poppy flowers. This is a reworking of the myth of Adonis, and this is taken from my first poetry collection, Simply Being, which is the only poetry collection up until now. Okay, yeah. Deep from within the earth's fathomless womb, when blood blazes with birth, it is a blare, a bling of beauty among the sleeping modest. An annunciation of an anastasis kisses the terra firma with the rising poppy, whose heart to fire hides a path, a coal black crossroad of mystery, well obscured within the flaunty scaffold, on a red carpet by the shores of Byblos, yet in the fields of Argenteuil. Adonis, puer, a passionate call for love and life, stands proud and eternal from the Puella's bosom. With eyes of the sun and of the night is a rising star. Astarte's breath, an announcement of sunrise, blows over the crimson main. Specks of ruby awaken, scattering along the tips of the jaded wool, among the humble nobility of the yellow, violet, and indigo buds, swaying their heads to the crooning tunes of the morning winds. In the strength of voice, the blaze of the mane, and the dilating veins of the singing, is the raucous song of life, sung by the coq and the coquelicot. So, back to what Jung said. Jung said that archetypes are the images of our instincts. They give shape and form to our impulses. Poetry maybe is an elasticity in organizing these desires. Also, I recall from an interview with Michael Mead, he said poetry is the natural speech of the soul. He also says the soul doesn't speak like CNN. You know, the human soul is not easily deterred once it's given some space. And so poetry is this space. It is the space for the soulful speech of human life. And as we said before, it is based on taking unlike things and putting them together. So this psychology of connection here, that's what all creative artists are doing, actually. Again, this is what makes their work important. It is what brightens our horizons and our perspectives. And, you know, that way we don't really lose the capacity to describe our own experiences and make meaning from them. Okay, which brings us to the next topic that I would like to speak about. So we say poetry is the language of the soul. What about dreams? I mean, dreams, since a very, very long time ago, from, I believe, in all traditions and religions, dreams have always held a certain status. They've always had this authority. We always wanted to know what was behind our dreams. People tried to interpret what they saw. People tried to make meaning of it. People tried to see what will happen to them by looking at their dreams. So dreams are often looked at as premonitions, prophecies, or just, you know, the language of the soul trying to tell you something about yourself. But they are actually also archetypal expressions. And so my approach to poetry closely resembles my approach to the dream. We can take the poem the way we would take a dream, because, as we said, it is also a reflection of the psyche, which is having dreams, making visions. I don't know. Both dreams and poetry are an unfolding revelation of the depths of our unconscious. So no matter how conscious it is, I mean, we see it, we remember it, that means it became conscious, but it started from an unconscious source. We would also see that a poem, just like a dream, has its own character, its own flavor, its own personality, if you want to call it a personality. Each dream, each poem, because of its uniqueness, can be matched with one of our many archetypal voices. So the archetypal voices that were activated while writing it. And the important function of dreams is to bring the darkness of the unconscious into conscious light. And again, poetry can do the same. So a poem like a dream reflects the psyche's vision making. It reveals the depths of the unconscious, no matter how conscious it is. It has its own personality, matching the archetypal voice that was activated while writing it. And it also is responsible for making the unconscious conscious. Your unconscious manifests your dream consciously, but who dreamt this dream? It's, it puts the ego at work during editing and shaping these dreams through poetry or through maybe sometimes simply speaking about them. And then again, dreams contain images. They also contain symbols, and an image or a symbol is actually, it doesn't point to anything knowable. There is a lot of uncertainty in the symbol. It is dark. It is made of dark matter, just like our unconscious. Sorry, let me just, I'm going to help you, Omar, here with the mics. Okay. Right. Yeah, so we were saying that symbols are dark matter because they're also made of possibilities. They hint at possibilities. They do not really go towards a fixed meaning. If a symbol was fixed to a specific object, then it would not be a symbol, it would be a sign. So I could say cup, but I could mean life experience. If I meant cup literally as in, this thing that I'm holding right now, then this would just be a sign. But we have symbols in poetry the way we have dreams. They point at possible meanings. They don't claim to offer that meaning as a knowable thing that you immediately grasp. On the contrary. That's why we don't understand dreams all the time. We try to work our way around understanding them. And again, I believe, and so many other poets would agree with me, this is the same way that we should approach poetry. We should not try to understand it literally. We shouldn't put our cognition into action. We should feel the poem. We should let the symbol speak to us in its own language. I'm going to read 2 dream-inspired poems. The first one is called Rue as in street in French, Rue Royale. And okay, the Rue Royale. This is inspired by a recurrent dream that I've had many times before and over the years. The dream is very simple. I am in Edinburgh and I am walking towards Holyrood Palace. And it's funny how, it feels like I know the road very well just from the dream itself, although I've only been to Edinburgh 3 times. But, after the first time I started having this dream and, it was very easy for me to actually go around and find my way straight to Holyrood Palace. And I think it's because I had that dream very often. I don't know what it means. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I found a good way to try to make friends with it or try to get to know it better through writing it down as a poem. The perfect nesting box is a dream of a dream of a dream in a dream, led by the carrot of a crystal breeze, the spirit of the royal road. Fudge bricks smell me as I sniff the coffee and walk a path as familiar as that knowing smile on the moon's face. Let it take you where you take it. You can only go where your mind lives. Moss on cupcake hills sprinkles sphinx guards willing to give away free riddles. Arthur's seat, lift the veil. The road is a cobblestoned alligator's back. The rain has not lost its olfactory sense as it inhales sky-fallen tales. So I let the surrealism of the dream make and create meaning. And I find this to be a very helpful approach, not just because it makes us write poetry, but because it creates this connection. It makes it more intimate. And writing it down as a poem seeing it, pinning it down, crystallizing it, creates a connection between whatever is going on in your mind, in your unconscious mind, and the way it manifests. Another poem is called Ivory Button. And this is kind of a mix of different dream images. It's also a short poem. To write under lunar beams is to be in the spotlight of your own celestial visions, the thoughts of heavens within. Look up at this ivory button. Little do we notice that in its face is both the sun and the moon. You smile at the alchemy in the dark and shower in the golden light. Okay, so I want you for 2 minutes to make a list of some recurring dream symbols. So there might be 2, there might be 3, there might be 5, 10, but make a list of some of the most recurring dreams that you've had over the past, I don't know, as much as you want. So there might be some dreams that you've been seeing for the past month. There might be dreams that you've been seeing all your life since childhood. So I want you to make a list and then hold on to that list, and we're going to do something with it towards the end of the session. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Okay, so I hope you were able to jot down at least a few of the images of things or people that you see in your dreams. Okay, so a poem helps you articulate what you don't understand and helps you get in touch with your unconscious, as we said, whether you wrote a poem or not, but it still helps you to get in touch with your unconscious. I mean, sometimes you hear a poem Maybe you do not write poetry, but you like listening to poetry. You like the way it makes you feel without trying to understand it. But at the same time, it's helping you understand yourself, although you don't understand the poem itself, literally. And this is, again, because, as we said earlier, symbols and metaphors are portals that connect you to your unconscious, especially that processing a poem, just like processing certain emotions, does not happen at the literal level. You do not understand a poem, you feel a poem, you feel its meaning through this connection that is being made while either reading it or writing it. And because this is a conversation with the archetypes. I like the Arabic word for poem and poet. Poem in Arabic is sha'r, and a poet is a sha'r. And both of them come from the root shu'ur, which means feeling. So a poet, to translate it literally, means the person who feels. A poem is feelings. You know, sha'r, it's feelings. And that kind of highlights the most important aspect, the affective quality of a poem, which can be contagious, which has its own language, which has its own vehicle for communication. I'm going to quote my colleague, Jungian psychoanalyst Mark Winburn, who claims that metaphors involve the utilization of one conceptual imaginal domain to map or articulate the experience of a different conceptual or imaginal domain. Therefore, it transfers meaning between domains of experience, from conscious to the unconscious, from cognitive to somatic, from somatic to affective, from past to present and present to future, linking realms in ways not previously seen and transforming meaning by means of novel recombination between domains. And this is precisely the connection Jung finds in alchemy, the relationship between the alchemist and the metal, or the effect of the alchemist, the inner effect, that it has on the metal, which is the outer, all rendering the process of alchemy as a metaphor for personal transformation. The alchemist is transformed or individuated, to use a more Jungian term, simultaneously with the metal. And yes, poetry does transform the poet and also the reader, because the text itself transforms. So you would oftentimes find a poem transforming. It transforms by being recast into a new mold of interpretation each time. So you give meaning to the poem, you perceive it, you give it that whatever spirit that you perceive. This is something that is going on in your mind, in your feelings. So each time you read a poem, or each time a different person reads a poem, the poem is recast into a new mold of interpretation. And in this way, the reader is actually producing the text. It is not just the poet, but it is also the reader. As Jung says, two psyches engage, both change and both individuate. So the poet is only part of the process, but the reader is also a very important part as well. Okay, so that's why it's important to create a reservoir, your own conscious reservoir of images. Many writers do that already, so you could use the notepad on your phone, or you could actually have a small notebook and store in it images. They could be real images, real photos of things, or images of objects around you, or words that you particularly like or that cross your mind. So it's very important to try to capture these, and then try to create this metaphorical, mystical union with whatever objects you choose to combine together and you choose to reflect your feelings through. Okay, active imagination is important. You can engage with an image through active imagination or sand play. I'm not going to speak about sand play in detail here. I'm just going to bring it up. You could always look the term up and read more about it. It's keeping a notebook helps with both. You might store an image and then later on give it some time and focus and engage with it. this is what active imagination is all about. It's about engaging with an image. You look at the image, you let it speak to you. You literally let it speak to you. You write down a conversation. You might want to write down a set of questions and answers with that image. The image could be an image of a person. W.B. Yeats used to wear a mask and used to converse with the mask, used to let the mask have its own life and speak. And he would kind of let the energy of whoever is behind that mask speak out. I don't know if any of you do dream journaling, but dream journaling also helps. Sometimes it's not just images that recur in our dreams, but sometimes it's people. So you could see people in your dreams so many times that you end up high-fiving them. I mean, after a certain period of time where you haven't seen them, you see this dude in your dream and you're like, hey, you know, it's been a while. But yes, these people, you know, this is active imagination, but an unconscious type. You may want to bring this into consciousness and try to see what this image is trying to say to you, what this person can teach you, or what kind of a relationship with the image you can have through conversation. And we do that actually when in a couple of my creative writing classes, which I'm not teaching right now. But students found this to be particularly fun, to engage with an image and to have a conversation. And then out of that conversation, they could make up stories or poems or anything, because every image and every relationship with an image is a story or a poem in itself. Jung speaks about the visionary, so does Yeats, and so does Eliot to a certain level. The visionary is where the poet is not in control of the meaning or of the poem itself, where the voice kind of comes to you and where you are inspired. But anyway, once that happens, you can read for symbols, read for the unconscious. And again, this happens a lot during active imagination. So oftentimes you could engage with an image that you've seen in your dream. It could be a painting, it could be I don't know, some random photo, but it's, you know, it speaks to you. So we consider this a visionary aspect of writing. And meditating on an image or focusing on an image and having this engagement helps to release the different voices of the archetypes within, because as Virginia Woolf says, and I love this quote, "I am not one and simple, but I am complex and many." So this is an enactment of the archetypes. So the different eyes, the different selves that we have in us, it's very important to engage with them and to set them free from time to time. So this is an exercise that I would like to share with you. I don't know if we will have time for it, but so you made a list of recurring dream images. And now you could do another list, and this would be a list of things that are around you. I like going to the pantry for this type of found poem, but you're not looking for words, you're looking for real objects. So you could go to the pantry and make a list of whatever is there, pantry or the cupboard. You may want to make a list of the spices, the foods, I don't know, the beans that you have there. Make a list. And once you're done, put two lists together. You have the list of recurrent dream images and you have the list of objects in the pantry. Create conceits. A conceit is when you put two very different objects together through a metaphor. So for example, I find rice in the pantry and I saw a unicorn in my dream. The unicorn is not rice, but when I'm making the conceit, I need to say the unicorn is rice. And then I need to say why. Why is the unicorn rice? Why are the flying shoes a bag of beans? So pick out 5 items from each list, mix and match, put them together, and then see what comes out. So conceits are often, they're not challenging, actually. They're not as challenging as you may think, but they broaden horizons, and they kind of open up a few areas that we don't usually visit in our minds. So yes, I believe we could use the rest of the time for the Q&A. I would just like to end with a couple of poems that were inspired ekphrastically. So ekphrasis is translating art into poetry. So it's actually reflecting on a work of art. The first one is a reflection on Van Gogh's Starry Night. It's called Starry Night, a Theogony. And there are myths. There's some ancient Egyptian mythology here. So as we said, we could play around with myths and we can mix them up with different mediums of expression, such as art and poetry. Neurons glower on the velvety darkness of the celestial carpet, sending pulses of rays of light from light along the axon of her longest dendrite. A stretched sciatica, Geb's root, Thoth's delight. Meanwhile, Cassiopeia, on her heavenly throne, pays tribute to the dreams of days past, granting, fusing, scattering the bulbs of thought and no thought through the collective window of the mortal race. Nut stretches out her limbs, wide and tight, also embossing the velvety skin with diamonds. Lapis lazuli softens up its shell and melts profusely, joining in the gem fest of her body. Nut, nacht, night, nuit, a molten lapis lazuli, a café trottoir, a set of rolling hills, a house with a yellow thatched roof, still awaken with delight to be tattooed on a canvas of one starry night. Now, the concept of alchemy and the concept of metaphor, enjambing or juxtaposing or mixing in any other way together seemingly unrelated things, is also something that we can do with mythology. And we would find that oftentimes our words kind of fit into one another, or they kind of evolve from one another. So Nut, we took the name Nut of the ancient Egyptian goddess of the sky, and we turned Nut to Nacht, which is the German night, and then night in English, and then nuit in French. So this, well, I mean, yes, this is basically a translation, but it was inspired by the goddess of the sky. There's also the duo, which is the icon duo. This is also inspired by art, but different art. This is iconography, Byzantine iconography. The first part is called iconic existence. Keep her locked in an eternal smile, that loving gaze you see in your mind's mind cave deep within yourself, or in the symbol on the solid wooden surface. Let her sing, but from her nether world into yours. Silence the singing icon to keep it alive. Never conjure the image or form it in this foggy existence. You kill the icon when playing Pygmalion. Strength lies in the centuries-old wood, solitude in solidity, and purity in the hardness within its heart of gold. There's reality in imagination, and more life in stillness, one that is beyond the tangible and breathing. Glossolalic, it speaks in echoes from the outback of non-air. When gods materialize, they die, only to be born again. The second part is called The Icon Speaks. Today she arises, beyond paint and gold, a sweating, breathing image, not of hard wood, but of solid being, with a voice as soft as the vapor of her fading image, as concrete as her emerging existence, encouraged into this world where she speaks melodies as the other world, that of symbols, dissipates. Clouds precipitate, and from that realm she moves, serendipitously, into the world of synchronicities. Whatever caused the conjuring or beckoning, there it was, the rapport between two realms, conversing right before my eyes. What have I called, pressed, or summoned? Like an accidental portal into the sea floor, deep, right into the lap of a cockle shell, Aphrodite blooms into this reality. Thank you for bearing with me, and I guess we can open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Rula. That was wonderful, very enlightening and moving work. Very sensual as well, very colorful, lovely, lovely reading. I think we've got lots of comments, but there is one question so far. Everyone can send through their questions now if they wish. Some obviously some compliments on both speakers and readers. But Paula Messina asks, how do you write? With a pen, pencil, chalk, a computer? Do you write aloud? So Adam and Rula, what's your process in terms of the material process?
Adam, would you want to go first? We'll do this alphabetically.
Okay. Well, I used to always write longhand. I used to always have a notebook and do it that way. And I think I read it somewhere, there was some sort of psychic thing that you're more connected to sort of writing through the pen than writing onto a word processor. And I still do encourage writers who do like my online creative writing workshop that they do their first draft onto paper, because as longhand, because I think the fear is that if you write onto a desktop, it can look too finished too quickly and it should kind of look messy. But saying that, since last few years, I have been writing straight onto desktop on the word processor, and actually you can find a kind of rhythm that way as well. You can actually find, it can, sometimes like with About Blank, I was like tapping out sentences just kind of with the rhythm with the keyboard. And I've also often now I write onto my phone, or I record. One poem from my last collection was done just onto the voice. It just came that way. So yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Rula?
The thing is, I write everywhere. Depending on when the ideas come to me, I can write on the wall. I have this adhesive paper, so sometimes if I'm passing by, I could just feel free to write on the wall. I used to keep markers in the shower, and we spoke about this earlier in September with Steve Kellner, and it was actually a thing. I thought I was maybe the only one, or I didn't know anyone else who did it, but he told us about the 3 B's: bed, bath, and shower, and that was so correct. When you're in the bath, you get those ideas. When you're on the bus, it's sort of this meditative state, and you get ideas. If that happens, then I write on my phone. If you're in bed and you don't keep a notebook next to you, then I guess your phone, if it's next to you, that would also be a good way. I do keep a dream journal, but it's pretty messy because it's between the notebook and the phone, and most of the time it's the phone. And then whether it's here or here, I eventually save them on a Word document on my laptop. So I write all over. It's I don't have one technique, but I'm always in that mode to catch an idea before it flies away. So I capture it with whatever weapons I have at hand.
Thanks for that. Byron Geist asks Adam, can you say something about the symbol of blank? I mean, literally blank, not metaphorically blank. I mean, you know what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea of About Blank came, I don't know if people know the URL, universal sort of thing that occurs on your, when you're Googling or whatever, searching something. And if you have a slow, internet, sometimes like I do, the About Blank thing is there a little longer. So that was the idea for it, which was kind of a joke. And it was kind of, I suppose, symbolically to begin with, it was a sort of a way of getting out of writing something that had to be about something specific. I was trying, and it was a bit of a joke title, really. I think I said this before, that sometimes there's sort of, we're told about these subjects we should be writing about, and I don't, and I think that's obviously really important that we do that. But I think there's also, it can be just as political, perhaps it's even more political, to not write about what we perhaps think, people telling us what we should be writing about. So it was a kind of, or that sometimes these things can be quite superficial when they're done. So that was the idea of it. I mean, then I got into the etymology of the words, blank coming from white, and it relates to the Old English, it relates to wheat. So out of blank comes wheat, and then, which forms the basis of our agricultural myths. And that led me then to the Cailleach, who's a pre-Celtic Irish myth, the Hag of Bearer. So there's lots, those things started to feed into it as well later.
I was wondering, I mean, there's interestingly, like, I don't know if it's an enemy of Jung or not, but in Lacan, the blank, the rupture in discourse, or the discontinuity, is where the truth of the unconscious is entering your imaginary or whatever. So did that, I mean, what I found about your, if I'm allowed to ask,
that's my answer.
well, no, but I mean, am I allowed to ask a question, Roula, as the moderator?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, when you read it, it was very fluid, but I felt there were like nodal points where you were capturing in one image the whole book. I mean, that's how it felt like the stepping out and stepping inwards at the same time. There were other images I felt which were more intense than some of the other more fluid writing. And when I said, I mean, the text performed itself, I meant that, exactly, it's not about something like a transcendent kind of about something. It's kind of through something that you're writing in a way. The text is going through itself rather than being about something with an agenda or pre-established kind of terrain or whatever. And that came through, but at the same time, it wasn't. And this is what I found fascinating about it. It didn't seem chaotic or too undecipherable. It felt lucid at the same time as being extremely, kind of adventurous. So that's what I really liked about it. They had both qualities at the same time. Because obviously not being about something can end up in being drivel, right? You could write, you have to, but yours wasn't, obviously. It's brilliant work. So, I mean, it was just fascinating the way you could do that. Control the unconscious in a way, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's lovely. Yeah, to know that. Yeah, I mean, it was important, I think, when I was writing it, as much as I was gathering this material from this speed writing document, and it was a lot of sort of collage writing, and you're right. I think that's really important. I think Anthony, what's his name, talks about this the other day about sort of interrupting yourself, because, and I'm really interested in that. I was always trying to break that logical linearity all the time. And maybe that was it. But at the same time, I still wanted to write something that people could engage with, and I was thinking, I often think of music, like, when you're listening to, let's say, an instrumental piece of music, you don't think, oh, I wonder what this piece means, and or you might, but really you either engage with it or you don't. So it was really, and that was that's the first, like Roula said, the feeling element. So I wanted to try and do that in a kind of literary way, that you'd hopefully bring an atmosphere and bring readers into it in some way, which is always a sort of trick, I suppose, that writers do. It's like, come in, listen to me, and this sort of thing, and then you can kind of create this chaotic world and throw, but it's like once you've got them in, then that's kind of half of it. Then you can do all this crazy stuff, if you like. But it was, I suppose, the voices in it are sort of shape-shifting, and I suppose that's always the thing, isn't it? That you're writing, for me anyway, it's writing very fast and then working out what the hell is going on, and try. Yeah.
Do you edit? How long is the editorial process compared to the original or primitive process of writing, the first process? Are they half, or is it majority? What does it end up being?
No, I would say that the writing itself is usually done really fast and that's I think the thing with poetry, isn't it? It's like a sprint. So there's that, even plays are like that. The initial flesh goes very fast, a few days sometimes, or weeks for a play, but and then the editorial stuff is the real cutting away and
sculpting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cassie Fielding asks, in relationship to earlier about blankness, she's suggesting a connection, the blankness on the page and the fertility of the wheat. That might be a kind of, I think she was catching on to what you were saying about blankness. And then Simon Madrell asked, can you tell us more, for example, the reference and spelling about the Irish writing from the place names?
Dinshanicus?
I believe that's what Simon's asking, I think.
You want me to explain more about?
For Adam. Yeah, sorry, no, it is for Adam, sorry. Yeah, the reference and the spelling of the Irish writing for the place names, yeah.
Okay, let me get that. So I think it's D-I-N-D, I have to check it myself, S-E-N-C-H-A-S, I think is right. Dinshanicus is how you say it.
Right.
Let me just check. Dinshanicus. Is that right? So yeah, and Dinshanicus means, you know, power of place, and it is this material from in Irish mythology where it's all to do with place names, and yeah, it's you know, kind of fascinating. So there's you know, and how then that feeds into, and it's a connection, I think, to psychogeography as well, how that kind of feeds into it as well.
Cassie Fielding says, it seems that both of you treat poetry as a conversation between the conscious and the unconscious as the alchemical third.
Yes,
so,
that's very nice
Roula,
way of putting it.
Roula, would you like to treat that? Give us your tuppence on that one.
Well, Cassie, that's a very brilliant way of expressing it, actually, because as we said, it's kind of a collaboration between the conscious and the unconscious. So when we write out the poems, yes, they are conscious because we're writing them. This is the work of the ego, but the energies behind it that manifest through the symbols and the images and the connections that we make through metaphors, these are all from the collective unconscious. So yes, it is a good way of integrating, or at least an attempt to make something out of this dialogue between the two.
And I was thinking, I mean, the alchemical third is something else, but I'll get to that. But I've got to wait. Mary Maxwell is thanking everyone for the great work of this evening. Now, Simon Madrell says he's found it. Lore of places. Is that what it's meant to mean?
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Lore of places. Great. I mean, Adam, you must know of you know, the idea of the Deus Loci as well, the spirit of place. Have you heard of that term?
Yes. Yeah. Of course.
Which I'm familiar with in the travel writing and some of the novels of Lawrence Durrell, who made it quite famous. You know, he would talk about how people were the artifacts of the city, for example, in like some of his novels, how the city had a kind of archetypal almost, structurally archetypal influence on the individuals. You know, that they were the flora and fauna of the city and so on. Is that something different to lore of places, like spirit of place, lore of place? Are they the same thing or are they different? I don't know.
I would say that's more. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all connected. You know, when it comes to writing, and there's also that psychogeography as well. When you think of the flaneur type of figure as well. So there was that sort of idea of wandering around the city and how that then, you know, and I suppose because it was a new city to me, and it's kind of strange as well, because it's amazing in Dublin because you know, you've got because Joyce did record Ulysses. Joyce recorded Dublin so well in Ulysses, you know, with the sort of names of roads and places, that sort of thing. That so being in Dublin, it's like you're living in Joyce's imagination, and even plaques here. They don't have just the plaques of famous writers and artists who lived in houses. They actually have the names of the characters in Ulysses. These are fiction, so it's like you're literally in Joyce's imagination. You know, I don't know if there's any other cities that really do that. And so I don't know if that answers your question really, Emma, but yeah.
No, but I mean, it's nice to know that the fiction is just as real as the supposed real. I mean, when a work of the imagination becomes that fundamental, I can understand how the kind of the fictional contents become as real as what we walk around every day. Raymond Harrison asked, for both poets, it seems you're suggesting that to find oneself, one has to leave oneself behind. In what manner is Jung's alchemical transformation, the psychological transformation of the ego into the self?
I mean, where's Rula gone? But
I'm here
are you there?
thinking about it. I mean, my first hunch would say no. You can't leave yourself behind if that's what you're working on, because again, to use the alchemy metaphor, it all starts with the confused mass, and what better confused mass than oneself. So no, I would say you would extend the self, expand it. And again, this is partly why I also find Jung's psychology to be a psychology of connection. It's not all about the ego, but then again, the self or oneself is not just one's ego. It is also everything else and everybody else. Hence the collective unconscious and the archetypes. So I would say ego suppression is not really, or ego, whatever, I mean, leaving it behind or something, is not really leaving oneself behind. But the theme is very recurrent. So we find that in myths, we find that in religion. We find it in the story of Jesus when he says that you turn the other cheek. I mean, this is the biggest way of putting it, of keeping your ego at bay. But the ego is still important. Keeping it at bay doesn't mean you're not working with yourself. But focusing and concentrating on the collective unconscious is realizing that you are a drop in the ocean, but it's still realizing what you are. So you're not really leaving yourself behind. I wouldn't say so. I don't know if Adam would agree, or he might have other thoughts about it.
Yeah, well, it's like, I mean, it's like the writing or the art captures the totality of the self, doesn't it? It's the psyche. So the ego is one part of that. And I do think that I think with my writing, it's like I do want to get out of the way of myself. And I think I'm often, and I probably want to do that in life as well. It's often things work better when actually you get out of the way of things. So you still have those intentions to try and do stuff, but you don't push too hard. And in fact, I've kind of learned that. I learned that with about blank, but this is the funny thing, isn't it? Because you're writing this material kind of out of nowhere and putting it together and finding sort of some kind of aesthetic quality to bring it all together somehow. So, and like music, when you're editing music, what makes you decide to stick that bit there and that, put it all together in that way? You have a feeling for it, So I suppose it's developing that side. But the funny thing is that you're doing it, and you do know on some level that perhaps this has something to do with yourself. But with this, it really did become quite scarily revelatory of my inner life and stuff going on, and even since as well. So by getting out of the way of yourself and into interrupting yourself in that way, I was putting together something that I wasn't consciously aware of, and it contains so much of my inner self in it, and that's really interesting. And I think isn't that the creative process anyway? Pinter writing was a voyage of discovery, and so it is.
And Jung says that when he says that we are vessels for creativity. So in a way, the creative process has a sort of, I don't want to call it a self-abnegation, but you're not really speaking for yourself only. You are an inspiration behind what you're doing, but there's a greater force that you and other people will realize once the artwork is done, once the poem is out, once the painting is out. I think he mentions this in his essay on Picasso, and also his essay on Ulysses. So it's in his creative works, I think, number 15, The Spirit in Man and Art. He speaks about this topic, and I do agree. I mean, we are many, we are everybody else. There's this me-ness about me. I cannot completely get out of it, But when I make art, I am actually speaking for the different voices that are in me. And, I am kind of performing some sort of a communion with the collective unconscious, which is everybody else. So it's not an easy thought. I mean, it is scary, Adam, yes. So am I me? Am I not me? Who am I? What does my art say about me? Does it say anything about me? Am I just a vehicle? Am I just a vessel? But I think it's a little bit of both.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you can see, like, look at any artist and you can see the topics and themes that kind of they go over and over, and they're often very personal things. Like even Murakami, the obsession with the, quite passive male protagonist and the mysterious woman, and the suicide, these are themes going on and on, but they still have a collective. It's not just, oh, this is Murakami going on about something that happened from his teenage, period, but it's a coming together, isn't it, of those things. And then you kind of think, well, we're all alive at the same time. So even our experiences, say, with our parents that are personal, there's probably something deeply collective to that, because if you think of all our ancestry that brought everyone to those points, it's all kind of shared, if you know what I mean. I'm kind of been thinking about that recently as well.
Bridget Howarth thanks you both for great readings, and then says, is it tough at times when dreams conjure up aspects of recall or recollection that in dreams we're trying to make sense of, because the events that trigger the dreams may have been unpleasant or uncomfortable? So I suppose, I think she's asking about maybe more traumatic or wounding experiences. And is there I think she's asking, is there a difference there to just any old, working through dream material, I think. Is that?
Yes,
Yeah.
and this is why it's very important to work with dreams. This is, again, dream work and shadow work at the same time. So nightmares or shadow work and working with these unpleasant memories or unpleasant experiences that trigger these dreams is, it's very important to do so. A great poet, Leah Larwood, who isn't with us today, who couldn't make it. She's an expert at this. She does a lot of poetry workshops that deal with shadow work and that deal with dreams and dream implantation and controlling your dreams and harnessing them. And yes, it is tough. It's not easy at all, especially when dreams, as you say, Bridget, when they conjure aspects of recall that because that came out of events that are unpleasant. It's a good way of dealing with it, by the way. It's a good way of trying to understand it, to process it by using our dream images. So it's not easy at all. Shadow work is one of the toughest things that can ever happen in therapy or in whatever process you're going through, but it's very important. It's sort of like a detox, which also isn't easy.
And there's no avoiding it, unfortunately. As Jung said, you've got to, what does he say about, it's not about imagining visions of lights, but going into the dark,
Exactly.
And dreams, there's always, I guess the dreams are shocking or the images are striking. So you do look at them. Because if it was all kind of just, I don't know, jazz music in the background, you wouldn't really think about it. But an image occurs and it makes you look at it, doesn't it?
The only way out is in. So you need to go in order to get out.
That's true. I agree with that. Pierre Kardaskia asks, he knew the connection between psychogeography and psychology, but not depth psychology. For him, the theoretical background didn't dig too deep into Jungian approach. He asks us at the end, Adam, do you have any reference to help me refresh my state of art? I think what he means, but oh, hi. We'll get to that in a second. Yes, Glenda, you had a question. Oh, the knowledge. Yes, sorry, Pierre. Okay.
Yeah, I do have a question. I'm thinking, sorry, let me unmute. Can you unmute me? It says
we
I'm
can hear you. Yeah, you're unmuted.
We can hear you.
No.
Now you're muted. You're muted now.
How do I unmute her?
Unmuted now. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I was thinking about when one does something one writes in a very universal way. It's all very bland. But if you write about your deep personal experiences, that's where other people connect, and the inner self connection there. But I was also thinking about the city, and I'm not sure that we all live in the same cities. It's said that every child lives and grows up in a different family, particularly if there are many years between the birth of the children. They're growing up in their own unique perception of that family. And I think work has been done having people map out cities. And if people map where they go in the city and what's important to them in the city, you get a lot of different maps from a lot of different people, which are quite idiosyncratic. So I don't really feel that I live in Joyce's city. I live in Glenda's city, which
Yeah,
is
no, of course. Yeah.
Adam's city and everyone else's city. And
We all live. The amazing thing is, we all live in Joyce's. If those who've read Ulysses live in some shape, even if they haven't been to Dublin, they live in Dublin in some shape or form as well. You can look at it that way, which is kind of amazing, isn't it?
I was thinking about that question of the self. There's a wonderful introduction by Susan Sontag for an edition of Walter Benjamin's One Way Street. And she talks about the self being a project, and how the self is always too slow, and how the self is always in arrears to itself. And I felt that was very pertinent to both your talks today, that, you know, that you're always catching yourself up in a way, as an artistic temperament. Is that true? Would you find that true, that you're never at one with yourself? You're always lagging behind the next thing, or somehow there's a lag, to use a internet term?
Really? Do you want to go?
I don't feel that way. No.
I do.
Oh, do you?
Adam, you do.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes I feel at one, you know, when you know, but most of the time I'm in a state of sort of existential crisis.
Yeah, maybe at one with the many selves, again, to look at it archetypally.
No, but I was thinking in the sense that an artistic work, as I think you'll both attest, is never finished. You know, it's not like Picasso paints a great painting and then says, you know, I've made it, I've done it. You know, he's always kind of creative destruction is always happening in our temperaments and in the material works that we produce. So you guys, you know, when you've written something great or you're something that you're happy with, do you feel like somehow your work as an artist is finished? No, you're always searching for something new and some new way of banking on it and continuing, right? I mean,
yeah, but even when it's out there, even when it's published, or even when the painting is hung on the wall or whatever, that same painting can change without you making any changes to it, but it can change through your perception of it. Because as we said before, I mean, it's always cast into a new mold, depending on the differences in the experience of who's looking at it, who's interpreting it. So with each different interpretation is a different piece of art. Right.
It's a bit like Glenda's comment about how with each child in a family, it's a different family in a way. Imagine parents kept on having children, it would be the family would be indefinitely different, which is quite interesting, I think. And that Glenda's point actually resonates with me because I'm the baby of my family, so I can understand how it was a different family for me than it was for my elder sister. Moving on, people are leaving slowly. Pierre wants a more modern reference than Debord. I think he's asking about situationism. Are there any? I think Pierre wants to know, you know, of any recent references that might help him in understanding the approach of psychogeography and depth psychology. Do you have any recommendations, Roula or Adam? Sort of, kind of, I suppose he's asking for theoretical references that might help his understanding to move in his own work, I presume.
Okay. Pierre, I'm reading your comment. I knew the connection between psychogeography and psychology, but not depth psychology. For me, the theoretical background didn't dig too deep in Jungian work. To be honest, I thought this approach disappeared with the situationism and that the drift became the technical word for pub crawl in art school. Not sure I understand your question, Pierre.
Yeah, I'm a bit lost as well, but I mean, I know
Yeah.
Rollo-May writes about depth psychology and
Yes. Susan Rolla, definitely. Yes.
But
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I'm not sure is that your question, Pierre? Are you asking for sources in depth psychology?
I should say I'm not a psychologist, by the way.
Neither am I. But yes, I mean, with depth psychology, of course, there's Susan Rolla.
Don't know if
Yes.
no, more modern than Guy Debord. Guy Debord publishes in 1958, so it is not so far from us, no? So
Yeah.
more. Otherwise, I don't know. We could mention Gaston Bachelard, no, who offered the term topoanalysis, no, as the if I remember well, the systematic psychological study of the sites of our intimate lives. But
yes, can somebody hear me? Yes.
Yes, Pierre, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, my problem is that all these people didn't have any Jungian background. Debord knew psychology from a kind of Marxist reinterpretation of psychology, and Bachelard didn't know Jung too. I don't think so.
No.
So you're asking for in a way a Jungian equivalent that might bridge the two, the different. Okay. Anyone?
There are many. I mean, you could look at the works of Professor Andrew Samuels, Susan Rowland, Caron Legris, also. These are the
James
ones
Hillman.
Mine? James Hillman, definitely. Yes, of course. Yes. So, yeah, there are plenty. Basically, well, the Jungian community is expanding. So, yeah, these are some of the names at the top of my mind right now. Edward Casey, Byron would know. Byron is also a Jungian.
Yes, but about a psychogeographic approach.
I would say Professor Andrew Samuels would have written something about that. I don't know, Byron, how about Rinos Papadopoulos? Do you think he has written something about psychogeography?
I remember myself, Will Self has written a lot about psychogeography, a writer.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He writes a lot. He used to write, and I haven't seen it in ages, but I mean, when I was in London about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, he used to write a column on psychogeography, did he not? Famous writer, I think, not famous, but you know, well-known writer in the UK. Will Self has written a lot on this, I think. But he's not a psychologist or a theoretician, to my knowledge. I think he's just like writing about it. So
that's right, yeah.
Yeah. Byron is suggesting Edward Casey, and he says that Professor Rinos Papadopoulos writes about refugees. But yes, it could be relevant. Pierre, your question is interesting because I don't know if you know about our forthcoming conference to be held in London in early July with Leslie Gardner and Catriona Miller and me. It's going to be about, but it's a feminist theme conference, feminism and space. So maybe if you could jot something down about psychogeography and feminism, this could be something of interest. Sarah, also a depth psychologist, is saying James Hillman's City and Soul. So there you go. You've got a couple of references here you can make use of.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
right. I mean, the 2 hours and 20 minutes have run their course. Does anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask or comments they'd like to make? If not, then I think it just remains for us to thank our readers, speakers this evening, Roula-Maria Dib and Adam Wyeth. It's been a really, really fascinating, revelatory event. And I believe, Roula, there are 3 more days or 3 more days of the festival left,
3 more
right?
days. Yes, we have tomorrow. We have Mona Arshi, so it's going to be a very exciting session. And after tomorrow, we have a Shakespeare session starring Patricia Finney and Sarah Smith. Sarah, who was with us today. I don't know, Sarah, are you still there? Don't think so. And on Friday, we have an editor's chat. So that would be the grand finale of the festival, where a few journal editors will be discussing with the audience about some of the challenges and some of the good stuff and the pet peeves and everything that goes behind the scene of being an editor. So we'll talk about rejections, acceptances, the work that we do. It'll be Andre Nafis Saheli, who we hosted before, Kostia Tsolakis, who we also hosted earlier, Roysen Nyachtin, who we had also, actually, no, we hadn't hosted her during this festival, and me. So yes, it's only 3 more events, and we hope to see you there for some or all of them. And Omar, I want to thank you so much for being such a wonderful host. It's good to be a guest every now and then, you know?
Of course.
So, and having a great host like you is wonderful. Adam, it was a great honor to read my poetry right after you. So thank
nice
you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. It's been really lovely. And thank you everyone for listening. It's been so nice to do this.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone. Sleep well or wake up well or whatever, wherever you are in the world. And we look forward to hopefully to seeing you in other events at the Indelible Festival Literature before Friday.
All right.
Goodbye, everyone.
Good
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.